A very good evening and welcome to the programme. First tonight, please let me die. That is the heartfelt plea of a man who has just days, maybe hours, to live. George Martin, who's 86, has terminal lung cancer and is starving himself to death.
Well, as the law stands, no one is allowed to help him to die. So he's using his last moments to call for a change in that law. Mr. Martin agreed to speak to our reporter, Joe Healy.
It is an absolute travesty.
An absolute travesty, says George. He was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer 2 weeks ago. Since then, all he's wanted is to die, but no one can help him. If they did, they'd be breaking the law.
I have no choice.
You have no choice in it because you can't legally be assisted to end it.
And what do you want to see happen, George?
Changing the law.
Changing the law.
George was a chartered accountant and was in the Fleet Air Arm during the war.
My granddad's somebody who always sings and jokes and laughs and is very active and always has been, and this isn't him. He's not the same. It's not nice to watch this.
I'm sorry.
It's all right, darling. It's all right. But, you know, I love him and I'll be here for him and I'll support him in whatever decision he makes. But I can't do anything to help him.
Terrible.
Terrible
situation.
Terrible situation.
A terrible situation.
Yeah.
For the last 9 years, he's signed a living will, refusing medicine if he's seriously ill. Now he's resigned to starving himself to death. Why have you chosen not to eat?
To end it.
It nearly is the end, but George is using his last hours to fight his cause. His last words as I left him were, "Never forget me till there's a change in the law." Joe Healy, BBC East Midlands Today, Westwood in Nottinghamshire.
Well, George Martin is not alone in his wish to have the right to die. His views are supported by the campaigning group Dignity and Dying. Earlier this evening, I spoke to Jo Cartwright from the group and asked her why they want greater choice to alleviate suffering at the end of life.
I think that people like George should have the choice of an assisted death at home in the UK, because it would stop him from having to take such a desperate decision that he has had to take by stopping eating and drinking, to have some control over the end of his life. So for some people, even with the best possible end-of-life care, they will have a bad death, and he saw that in his wife 20 years ago. And for those people, I think that if they have the choice of an assisted death and they know that's available, it will give them that peace of mind. And if we had an assisted dying law where they could apply to their doctor and they could discuss their decision to choose an assisted death with healthcare professionals, then all of the alternatives could be explored and they could have support in place.
You know, what do you think of a nation that, you know, we put animals to sleep if they're suffering, but we will not allow people to make the choice to take their own lives, essentially?
I think that we do need to face this problem head on. People like George are suffering because there isn't a compassionate law for assisted dying, and if we legalise assisted dying for people in George's position, no more people would die, it's just that less people would suffer, and I think that's what we really need to remember.
Well, joining us now is Baroness Findlay, who was a member of the Lords Select Committee on the Assisted Dying for the Terminally Ill Bill. She's also the co-chair of the think tank Living and Dying Well, which, and I quote, aims to keep the law safe for sick and disabled people. Baroness Findlay, thanks for joining us. So, should people like George Martin be helped to die, and if not, why not?
Well, what we're talking about is, should you be assisting their suicide? And do you change the law to assist suicide and all the dangers that go with that? That's quite different to say, are you going to support somebody while they're dying? And I am very concerned to hear the situation that he is in, where he's feeling, because his wife had a bad death 20 years ago, that is sort of inevitable, and it isn't. Things 20 years ago were much, much different to how they are today. But also that he could have support and he could have drugs and medication to put him back in control. So the last days of his life, which probably won't be any longer that way than the current route he's taken, will actually be of good quality that he can spend with his family and leave them with good memories, instead of the tragedy of them remembering him starving to death and wanting to take his own life.
If we don't give people the chance of assisted suicide in very clearly regulated cases, surely many more UK nationals will travel to facilities like Dignitas in Switzerland, or they'll go to Belgium, Holland and Luxembourg, where under the law a medical person, a doctor, a health worker can assist in that way.
And if you look at what's happened in those countries, in Oregon there's been a 4.5-fold increase since they changed their law. It's gone up year on year. In Holland, 1 in 37 of all deaths are now by euthanasia or assisted suicide. That would be about 10, 11, 13,000, depending on how you translate the figures, well over 10,000 a year in England and Wales. Those are huge numbers. This isn't a small number of people. You have to make sure that people do not feel under pressure, do not feel coerced, that somehow they have a duty to die. And those of us that have looked at the law and the different bits of legislation around the world are concerned that the safeguards do not adequately protect people who are vulnerable.
Okay. Baroness Finlay, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for talking to us.